My name is Edward Miller. I am 68 years old. I live alone in a modest house in Ohio, a place that has seen better days, days when laughter and warmth filled every corner. And the scent of Mary's cooking made even the neighbors envious. Mary, my beloved wife, passed away 8 years ago, leaving me with silence that felt heavier than stone. Those quiet walls now echo only with the ticking of the clock and the occasional rustle of leaves outside my window. Life after Mary has been slow. I spend my mornings observing the world outside, watching families bustle about their lives, young children running freely, parents chatting with neighbors, dogs barking joyfully in the yard. It's a stark reminder of a life I once had, a life with energy, warmth, and love. Sometimes I envy them, though I tell myself not to. I have my memories. Memories can be both a comfort and a curse. Birthdays were the hardest. Mary always made them special. Every year, she would wake me with breakfast in bed, a chocolate cake she baked herself, and little surprises that made me laugh until my stomach ached. I used to love those days. After she died, birthdays became reminders of what I had lost. At first, I stopped acknowledging them altogether. But deep inside, I hoped for some recognition. A simple phone call. A hug. A sign that my own family still remembered me. My son John was supposed to fill that void. He was my only child. I had worked my entire life so he could have a future brighter than mine, sacrificing comfort, sleep, and even health. Yet, here I was, expecting nothing but acknowledgement and receiving almost nothing. On the morning of my 68th birthday, I woke earlier than usual. Frost clung to the edges of the windows, and the sunlight barely peeked through. I dressed carefully, combed my thinning hair, and brewed a pot of coffee. I even set the dining table for two, a habit from when Mary was still here. Old habits die hard, as they say. I told myself John might call. He might even bring his children. I imagined their laughter echoing through these walls, filling them with warmth. But the hours passed, and the phone remained silent. Then there was a knock at the door. A delivery man stood there with a small brown box. Confused, I signed for it and brought it inside. Inside was a sleek, expensive bottle of whiskey, along with a single, short note. "Happy birthday, Dad. John." No call. No visit. Just a bottle. I sat staring at that bottle for a long time. Whiskey had never been just a drink to me, it was shared moments, memories of winter nights by the fire, Mary and I laughing softly over a glass. But this gift wasn't about thoughtfulness. It was about convenience. John hadn't bothered to call, to visit, or even to ask how I was. He had clicked a few buttons online and thought that was enough. For a father who had sacrificed decades of his life, it felt like a slap in the face. I could feel the bitterness rising inside me. I held the bottle, turned it over, examined the label. It wasn't whiskey I was holding, it was a symbol of indifference, neglect, and forgotten love. Later that afternoon, some neighbors came by with pies, casseroles, and cheerful greetings. They asked if John was coming to celebrate. I forced a smile and lied, "Oh, he's busy with work." Their sympathetic looks only deepened my feelings of neglect. Even the neighbors, who cared less for him than I did, seemed to value my presence more than my own son. That evening, as I sat in my armchair staring at the bottle, an idea took root. John's father-in-law, Richard, lived just a few blocks away. Richard, a proud man with wealth and influence, often boasted about how close John and his daughter were. I thought to myself, if John believes a bottle can replace presents, then let's see how he feels when it isn't even in my hands anymore. It was petty, perhaps childish, but it was the only revenge I could think of. I had been ignored and overlooked for too long. This small act would remind them I was aware and still mattered. I wrapped the whiskey bottle carefully and tucked the note back inside. The cold evening air bit at my cheeks as I walked toward Richard's house. My cane tapped the pavement with deliberate rhythm. When Richard opened the door, his face lit up. "Edward! What brings you here?" I handed him the box. "This is for you, Richard." "From John." His eyes widened. "From John? But why would he?" He stopped, confused. I didn't answer. I simply smiled faintly, patted his shoulder, and turned to leave. The look on his face was priceless. The seed of doubt had been planted. Walking back home, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. I wasn't the invisible, forgotten father anymore. I had taken control, however small the act. That night, sitting alone in my living room, the silence felt different. It wasn't crushing. It was almost sweet. Like revenge served in a glass of whiskey. The following days were strange. Richard called John repeatedly, asking about the bottle. I could see the tension rising. John left me 2 voicemails, short, awkward, and filled with unspoken frustration. "Hey Dad, did you get the gift? Just checking in." The second one sounded irritated. "Dad, Richard called me. He said you gave him the whiskey. What's going on?" I didn't reply. For the first time in years, I had his attention, not because I begged or complained, but because I had done something unexpected. I spent nights remembering John as a little boy, hugging my legs, calling me his hero. I remembered working long nights, sacrificing sleep and comfort, all for him. Mary had warned me once, "One day, he'll forget, Eddie. He'll get busy with his life." I didn't believe her then. But now I saw she was right. When John finally visited, tension filled the room. "Dad, why did you give my gift to Richard?" I looked him in the eye. Calmly. "Because he appreciates you more than I do these days." The silence that followed was heavy. He didn't know what to say, and for once, I didn't need him to. That small act had sparked a silent war, one that would ripple through our family, stirring emotions, resentment, and eventually, understanding. I can still remember that day vividly, the day when everything seemed to shift in a way I never anticipated. My son came that morning, the very son I had watched over and nurtured for decades, the one I'd raised with my blood and sweat. The night before his birthday, he had called me, his voice casual yet polite, mentioning that he had sent a small gift for me. I thought, perhaps a book, or maybe some gadget I'd been wishing for quietly. But when the gift arrived, it stirred a strange unease within me, the kind that makes you question trust and intentions. The package arrived around noon. As I held it in my hands, a strange thrill ran through me. I slowly untied the ribbons and carefully opened the box. Inside, neatly cushioned by soft paper, was a single bottle of whiskey. I chuckled softly at first. I could remember how many times I had told him, "Dad, I don't drink. Why would I get you alcohol?" But he must have remembered differently. Perhaps in his mind, this was the perfect gift. Or perhaps it was a subtle reminder of the gaps in our understanding. The card included with it was simple, yet its words carried a weight I couldn't ignore. "Happy birthday, Dad. Hope you like it. Your son." I held the card in my hand, feeling the texture of the paper, almost as if he were speaking to me across the room, reminding me of the years, the memories, and all the things left unsaid. Slowly, my eyes drifted to the bottle. The amber liquid seemed to catch the light and gleam almost defiantly, daring me to accept it. At first, I considered keeping it. Maybe I would enjoy a sip or two. But then a flash of old resentment struck me, a memory of all the times I had felt overlooked, misunderstood, and even disregarded by my own family. Accepting this gift as if it were ordinary seemed impossible. This bottle, I realized, was not just a gift. It was a challenge. A quiet provocation, reminding me that while I was his father, he would always exert his own will, his own perspective, without truly considering mine. I made my decision. I would not keep this whiskey. Instead, I would hand it over to his FIL, the one person who had long been a thorn in my side, the man who had never shown me the respect I deserved. His FIL, my daughter-in-law's father, was a man of rigid habits and cold opinions, someone whose presence had always unsettled me. He had never understood me, nor had he tried. For years, he believed I was a problem, an inconvenience, someone not worth his time. I knew that by giving him this bottle, I was not merely passing along a gift, it was a silent act of calculated defiance, a subtle lesson wrapped in amber liquid. That afternoon, I prepared for his visit. When he arrived, I greeted him warmly, the bottle hidden behind my back, my hand steady despite the storm of thoughts inside me. He smiled, oblivious to the tension, and I invited him in, pouring a cup of tea for myself as he settled in. Then, casually, as if it were nothing, I brought out the bottle. His eyes widened slightly, not from the value of the gift, but from the unmistakable implication of my gesture. I watched silently as he realized the meaning. This wasn't a simple bottle of whiskey, it was a statement. "You know," I said softly, "my son sent this to me for my birthday. I thought you might appreciate it more." His reaction was a mix of confusion and irritation. He muttered something about propriety and expectations, but I barely heard him. Inside, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I had done something subtle, a maneuver that required patience and restraint, yet carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. And as I sat back, watching him contemplate the bottle in his hands, I thought about my son. The boy who had sent me this gift, the one I had loved with all my heart, still unaware of the ripple effect his simple act had caused. Perhaps he intended it as a kind gesture, perhaps as a test, but either way, it had set in motion a series of events that none of us would forget easily. In that quiet room, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the curtains, I realized that sometimes, gifts are more than gifts, they are reflections of character, reminders of unspoken tensions, and opportunities to assert one's own perspective. That day, I had accepted my son's gift in my own way, and in doing so, I had reminded everyone in that room that respect and understanding are earned, not given. As he left, the bottle still in his hands, I felt a strange sense of closure. Not for my son, but for myself. For the years of quiet indignities, for the moments when my voice had gone unheard, for the patience that had been tested over and over again. The whiskey was gone, but the lesson lingered. And I, Edward Miller, 68 years old, had played my part with the dignity and subtle cunning that only decades of experience can teach. It was a chilly evening when I realized that giving my son's gift to his father-in-law wasn't just a fleeting impulse, it was a turning point. I had been sipping my coffee in the old kitchen, watching the sunlight fade into the amber glow of the lamps, thinking about the years that had led me here. My hands trembled slightly, not from age alone, but from the memories that surged back, relentless and demanding attention. I had always been a man who believed in fairness, in measured responses, in the careful weighing of consequences before acting. But something in me, perhaps a stubborn streak inherited from my own father, refused to accept the casual disrespect of a gesture that was meant to honor me. My son, John, had sent me a bottle of whiskey for my birthday, a gesture that should have warmed my heart. And yet, the way he had smiled, the arrogance in that smile, hinted at entitlement, at taking for granted the sacrifices I had made. Giving the bottle to his father-in-law was, in some ways, a subtle declaration, I was not to be taken lightly. But more than that, it was a message to John, a reminder that actions had consequences, and that I, though aged and perhaps slower in body, was not impotent in spirit. Days passed, and I observed the small tremors that my action caused in Michael's household. Subtle remarks from his wife, lingering looks, the way his father-in-law's smile seemed to carry an unspoken understanding, all of it fed the quiet satisfaction I felt. But I knew that satisfaction was fleeting, for the real test was how John himself would respond. John had always been a complicated man, charming when convenient, dismissive when confronted. His life had been cushioned with comforts, and he had rarely faced the kind of friction that might teach humility. I, on the other hand, had lived through storms of every kind, financial ruin, heartbreak, betrayal, illness. I had learned that patience and observation were often the sharpest weapons in a man's arsenal. One afternoon, as I was sorting through old photographs in the living room, a particular image caught my attention, a photo of John at age 8, grinning with ice cream smeared across his cheeks. I remembered that day vividly. We had walked to the park, and I had let him choose the flavor he wanted, even though I knew it would make a mess. He had laughed, a pure, unguarded laugh that seemed to echo through the years. And for a moment, I felt the pang of sadness that comes from realizing how little the child you loved still exists in the man before you. That evening, the phone rang. It was John. His voice carried a mixture of irritation and confusion. "Dad, why did you give it to him?" His words were clipped, the edges sharp with unspoken anger. I replied calmly, almost too calmly. "I thought it best that it found a home where it would be appreciated, son. Some gifts require understanding, and some men require reminders of respect." There was silence on the other end. I could almost hear him pacing, the weight of my words settling in the spaces between his thoughts. "You don't understand," he began, but I interrupted. "I understand perfectly. That's why I acted the way I did." After that call, days of tension followed. John avoided me at family gatherings, his eyes darting with an almost guilty recognition that I had wielded influence without raising a hand. His father-in-law, meanwhile, seemed to take a subtle pleasure in recounting the story at social events, careful never to mention my name directly, yet leaving enough breadcrumbs that everyone in the room understood the power dynamics at play. I realized then that revenge, or rather, the correction of entitlement, did not always require dramatic gestures. It could be quiet, meticulous, almost invisible. A glance, a small action, a withheld gift, these could weigh more heavily than anger or confrontation. And in that, I found a kind of vindication. But John, ever impulsive, was not so easily subdued. One evening, he showed up at my doorstep unannounced. I opened the door to find him standing there, a mix of frustration and hesitation in his eyes. "Dad, we need to talk." I invited him in, gesturing to the worn armchair where I usually sat to read my letters and journals. He hesitated, then sank into the chair, the weight of expectation heavy on his shoulders. "I don't get it," he said. I thought you'd be happy. It was just a bottle of whiskey. What's the big deal?" I leaned back, my fingers steepled, my gaze steady. "The deal, John, is not the whiskey. It's respect. It's understanding that your actions, no matter how small they seem, carry meaning. You send gifts, but do you consider the sentiment behind them? Do you understand that respect is not automatic?" "Exactly," I interrupted. "You didn't think. And that, son, is why you need to understand. A man's life is shaped not just by what he receives, but by what he gives and how he considers the impact of his actions." This was never about the bottle. It was about your awareness, your humility. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he spoke, almost inaudibly, I suppose I see that now." I allowed a small smile, not of triumph, but of quiet satisfaction. "See it, yes. And remember it. Life has a way of testing us in ways we do not expect. Sometimes, the lesson comes not from loss or pain, but from the subtle nudges we ignore." He left that evening with a subdued demeanor, the fire in his eyes tempered by reflection. I, too, felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The storm had passed, at least for now. Yet, deep down, I knew the journey was not over. Life has a peculiar sense of timing, and the real lessons often arrive when one is least prepared. John would face challenges, choices that would test not only his character but his understanding of respect and family. And when those moments came, I hoped he would remember, not the whiskey, not the act of giving it away, but the principle behind it. Days turned into weeks, and the household settled into an uneasy rhythm. I continued my routines, morning walks through the neighborhood, tending to my small garden, reading letters from old friends, and reflecting on years gone by. Yet, every so often, I would catch a glimpse of John, a fleeting look, a shadow of thought crossing his face, hinting at the internal reckoning that had begun. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sunset, a thought occurred to me. Revenge, when wielded with patience and precision, did not always manifest in grand acts. Sometimes, it was the subtle shaping of awareness, the quiet correction of oversight, the teaching of respect through small, deliberate actions. And perhaps, in this, I had succeeded, not in punishing my son, but in guiding him. The world outside grew dim, and the first stars began to twinkle in the sky. I sipped my tea, letting the warmth seep into my bones, and I realized that life, in its mysterious way, had provided a lesson not just for Michael, but for me as well. That even in old age, even in moments of perceived weakness, one could shape outcomes, influence actions, and leave an indelible mark on those we love. And so, as night fell and the house grew quiet, I knew that the story of the whiskey, the gift, and the lesson in respect was only a beginning, a chapter in the ongoing narrative of family, pride, humility, and the quiet power of deliberate choices. His voice soft but heavy with emotion, I never imagined that a simple gift, a bottle meant to bridge the distance between me and my son, would ignite a chain of events I could never have foreseen. After that day, when I handed the whiskey to his father-in-law, I felt a strange sense of power, a flicker of something I hadn't felt in decades. It was almost liberating. You see, when a man reaches my age, he learns to see patterns, to sense the currents beneath the calm surface of life. And the currents that day were turbulent. My son, unaware of my quiet judgment, went about his daily routine, confident that he had pleased me. He had no idea that the bottle he had sent carried far more than spirits, it carried an unspoken message, one that would unravel in ways he could never anticipate. I remember that evening vividly. The sun had dipped low, casting a soft orange hue over the worn wooden floors of my study. I could hear the distant hum of traffic from the street below, a reminder that life was moving fast for everyone else, but for me, time seemed to stretch and fold like an old piece of leather. I poured myself a small cup of tea, sat back in my leather chair, and began to plan quietly. It started with subtle observations. My son's house, though neat on the surface, was rife with little disturbances, arguments whispered behind closed doors, bills left unpaid, small betrayals that, when observed closely, painted a troubling picture. His father-in-law, the man who had received the whiskey, was not as jovial as he seemed. There was something calculating in his gaze, a sharpness that spoke of patience and strategy. And I realized, with an unsettling clarity, that the whiskey had placed me squarely in the middle of a delicate balance of power. I began to visit the neighborhood more frequently, under the guise of casual walks. My old eyes, though tired, could pick up details that younger men overlooked. I noticed subtle exchanges, the brief glances that spoke volumes, the hurried whispers that vanished before anyone else could hear. And in these moments, I began to understand the quiet tension that had been brewing, tension that my son had never seen coming. It was during one such walk that I encountered his father-in-law again. He was standing by his car, adjusting his tie, his posture rigid, as if preparing for some unspoken challenge. I greeted him casually, masking the storm of thoughts in my mind with the calm demeanor of a man who had seen enough to know when to remain silent. "Good evening," I said, my voice light but carrying the weight of experience. He looked at me, a flicker of surprise crossing his face, quickly replaced by a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Edward," he said, using my first name, as though familiarity could soften the edge of our interaction. "I trust your day has been pleasant." "Yes, quite," I replied, letting the words hang in the air. And in that silence, a subtle game began, an exchange of unspoken understanding, each of us measuring the other, testing the waters of patience, of power, of strategy. Days turned into weeks, and I continued my quiet surveillance. My son remained blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around him, too wrapped up in his own world to notice the delicate chessboard unfolding. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to maneuver pieces in ways he would never expect. Small favors to friends of friends, timely interventions, whispered suggestions, all carefully calculated to shift the dynamics without ever revealing my hand. Then came the night I had been waiting for. I received a call from his father-in-law, inviting me over under the pretext of a casual dinner. I accepted, of course, my mind alert to every nuance, every possibility. The house was warm, the lighting soft, but beneath it all, I sensed the currents of tension, the subtle undercurrent of fear and respect. My son was there too, unaware that the simple act of sending a gift had set in motion a chain of revelations. Dinner was served, conversations flowed, and I played my part with care, listening more than speaking, observing more than acting. And then, in a moment of carefully timed silence, I let slip a small anecdote, a story about a man who had learned that gestures, however small, could shift destinies. My son, oblivious to the deeper meaning, chuckled, while his father-in-law's eyes narrowed, the recognition dawning slowly, like the first light of day breaking through clouds. It was then that I realized the true power of patience, of observation, of quiet strategy. The whiskey had been more than a gift, it had been a catalyst. It had drawn out the hidden currents, exposed the vulnerabilities, and positioned me in a place of influence I had long since thought lost to age. And in that moment, I felt a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes not from vengeance alone, but from the meticulous orchestration of justice tempered by wisdom. Over the following weeks, subtle changes began to take root. My son, increasingly aware of the shifts, began to question his assumptions. Arguments that once seemed trivial now carried weight. Decisions he had taken for granted were questioned, not by me directly, but by the ripple effects of actions set in motion by a single bottle of whiskey. And I watched, with the careful patience of a man who had lived long enough to understand that time, when respected, could achieve what haste never could. I'll admit, there were moments when doubt crept in. Moments when I wondered if perhaps I had gone too far, if the fine line between guidance and manipulation had blurred. But each time, I reminded myself that life, especially in its later stages, offers rare chances for correction, for subtle realignment. And when handled wisely, these chances can alter the trajectory of relationships in ways both profound and lasting. By the end of that month, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The once casual, almost careless interactions between my son and his father-in-law had transformed. Mutual respect had grown, tempered by the lessons of patience, observation, and unexpected consequences. And I, Edward Miller, sat back in my chair, a quiet smile playing on my lips, aware that the seemingly simple act of redirecting a gift had reshaped the landscape of our family. Looking back now, I realize that life often presents us with instruments of subtle power, hidden in the guise of ordinary events. A birthday gift, a bottle of whiskey, can carry implications far beyond what any of us imagine. And sometimes, the most profound lessons come not from confrontation, but from the careful, patient orchestration of events, guided by insight, experience, and a deep understanding of human nature. I tell you this not as a boast, nor as a lesson meant to instruct, but as a reflection of a life lived fully, with awareness of the currents beneath the calm, the hidden threads that connect us all. And perhaps, if you listen carefully, you too will recognize the opportunities that present themselves in your own lives, moments where patience, observation, and quiet action can achieve results far beyond what any direct effort might accomplish. As I end this story, I sip my tea, feeling the weight of years and the satisfaction of subtle victories. The whiskey is long gone, yet its impact lingers, a reminder that even small gestures can catalyze great change. And in the quiet of my study, I am reminded once again that life's most profound lessons often arrive in the most unexpected forms, and that the wisdom of age lies not in grand gestures, but in the patient orchestration of seemingly ordinary moments.